That is a crazy price.
PDF in order to get it into the
That is a
Oh, you didn't give him PowerPoint? I'm not sure. Okay, that's fine. That's okay. We'll just use the PowerPoint.
Well, gentlemen,
Hey.
what an honor and a privilege to be sitting up here with such distinguished gentlemen.
Oh boy.
And myself.
See, and then Julie gave me a note for last week. Clark,
Anymore.
we're gonna get going.
Is Matt coming?
No, you didn't see
You
the
know that
email,
Clark,
man.
he's always a problem.
He is. All right, I'm gonna call the city council workshop to order this May 14th, 2024. And the first item on the agenda is MPC update on PFAS in Lake Elmo.
So for the rest, council, mayor, and citizens, this is basically an overview or higher overview of the MPCA plume, what's happening with PFAS in the city. In addition, that everybody should know, they're utilizing and coordinating the 3M settlement grant, settlement fund, which is $850 million. Right now, we have 9 grants that we're managing within the city, mostly with neighborhood city water hookups. But we're also using a couple other grants that are coming, that we've been studying for well number 2, and a treatment plant for a well down by 10th Street with well number 6. So these are a couple issues that are the MPC is helping us with. In addition, we also have contractor AECom, which will provides the technical expertise and the management for the SAF system, which is the system we've talked about at Tablin Park, stripping out the PFAS out of the water. And then they're working with different technologies to destroy the PFAS in a concentrated form after it comes out of that, and they're dumping the water back in Riley Creek, and they will be talking about that. And with that, we will, who wants to go first?
That's a great intro.
Okay, why don't you go first?
Does it just go?
It's just a
Oh,
PDF,
yeah,
so
that's just fine.
so I
Yep.
think we're just gonna have to,
Nope, this is fine.
I think it just goes down.
Yep.
It's not a PowerPoint.
Wait, so I'm Hannah Temmie. I'm with AECom. So I've been helping out with the investigation and the staff that's been at Tablin. So we're just gonna give that overview. So this shows the plume maps that we have developed as part of the investigation that we've been doing in Lake Elmo, and then also Oakdale and West Lakeland, so as a part of Project 1007. These plume maps show the impacts it shows the PFAS extent of both.
Closer here.
Okay.
Pick it up for the camera.
It shows in the Prairie du Chien on the left, and then the Jordan Aquifer on the right. And so you can just kind of see how extensive those impacts are. Everywhere that's green is below detection, that we actually have wells that have that data. Everywhere that's not colored is just a lack of data or outside of our project domain. And then anything that is blue and above would be above the MDH current drinking water standards. And then I guess going on is these are results from the groundwater model that AECom has put together. And this shows where the groundwater is going from key spots where PFAS is either originating, so at the Oakdale disposal site or ODS, or the Washington County landfill, so WCL on those maps. And then also Raleigh Creek, Eagle Point Lake, and then the West Lakeland storage ponds, which are key spots of infiltration of impacted surface water that greatly contribute to that plume. So this is the particle tracking, so it kind of just shows where, if you were to drop a particle at one of those spots, where is it going to go in the next 50 to 100 years? In these, the orange is in the Shakopee aquifer, and then the purple is in the Jordan aquifer. And then some of those 100 years that you see further to the east are deeper aquifers. And the reason for that coloring east of the fault is because there's a fault there, so it raises up those deeper units. But you can just kind of see where areas that would be most important for the city of Lake Elmo is you have a lot of impacts that are infiltrating from Raleigh Creek and Eagle Point Lake that kind of move southward through the area, and then from the Washington County landfill, those impacts primarily move directly east. The plume in that area is a little bit more southward and more towards Lake Elmo, and that's most likely because of historical pumping at Lake Elmo 1. That kind of drew the plume more this way. This particle tracking is under current pumping conditions. And so changing the pumping, so adding in new wells, that is going to change this migration a lot in that area. And that is definitely something, as you continue forward, looking at different well placement, we would want to be aware of, just to see how that plume might change with those different wells. Okay, so then getting into what the MPCA's, one of the scenarios or option as far as the feasibility study that we're putting together right now is to
I'm sorry, Hannah, could you just scan down a little bit on
Yep.
that, the very bottom? There we go,
Yep.
thank you.
So one of the options is this multi-benefit well array. This is one of the scenarios we're considering. This one that is up here is the largest array. We are looking at smaller scenarios as well, but all of them would include Lake Elmo, and would include the wells that are currently within the city of Lake Elmo. I know this is small, so I'll zoom in, I guess, on the map. The blue wells are injection, and the black wells are extraction wells. So the purpose of this would be you'd have the extraction wells, which would pump enough water to supply the city of Lake Elmo and Oakdale for their 2040 demand. And then this scenario also does include extraction in West Lakeland, but we would not be providing West Lakeland with municipal water. And then it includes these injection wells, and the purpose of the injection wells is to further provide kind of a mounding of groundwater, or that barrier to keep the PFAS impacts from continuing to migrate south. And it's both the extraction and the injection that will capture the PFAS. And then, like I said, this well array would provide enough drinking water to meet the projected 2040 demands for the city of Lake Elmo. So then just kind of going over here, this just shows that you would really be capturing all those particles and therefore the PFAS that was, that you could see migrating much further in the previous particle tracking. And then just kind of an overview, it would be 15 extraction wells, 9 injection wells. Right now, to meet current demand, we would then inject more water, and then as demand for the city increased, we would decrease that injection. We would repurpose 5 existing supply wells, and then also this well array does include 2 wells that are proposed for the city. So just trying to incorporate that all together. And then the costs would be about 230 to 350 million. And like I said, we are also considering smaller alternatives, which would then cost less, but they would still meet the same demand for the city. And then just on the note for the costs, the this cost also includes additional items that were included in the conceptual drinking water supply plan, such as hooking up residents that are currently on private wells to the distribution system. So you shouldn't view this cost as being in addition to those, because that already includes it. So when factoring that in.
Yeah, Councilmember Olson has a question.
So question on that, as, in that multi-benefit well situation, as some of those wells are then outside of both Oakdale and Lake Elmo, such as there's 2 new injection ones in Woodbury, 2 new pumping in West Lakeland, in that hypothetical, how does that work in terms of who owns that infrastructure? Since both cities right now are city independent systems.
Hi there, Andrea Dahlmeyer from the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. I'm the supervisor of the East Metro Unit and helping with this Project 1007. So that's something that I think the cities would have to come to an agreement with. We can assist to help that happen, but ultimately the communities would have to come to their own agreement,
Hypothetically,
hypothetically.
with those 2 new injection ones in Woodbury. We have eminent domain authority to condemn land in Lake Elmo. Oakdale has it in Oakdale. Does MPCA have it to, say, assist with Woodbury? Not presuming anything, but say they just didn't want to, they have their own needs. Does MPCA have the authority to help with that?
Yeah, as far as I understand, we do not have the authority to force any of that to happen. But if that's what made sense for the ultimate plan, for the remedy, I think that's something that we'd try and assist to make it happen.
All right. Thank you.
And I guess on the Woodbury note, these injection wells greatly help their water supply and keeping those impacts from migrating.
Yeah, I guess that was one of my questions. So when you're pumping 10,800 gallons per minute out of these 15 wells, 7,000 re-injecting, so you're leaving roughly 3,000 gallons per minute, right? That would be able to be distributed for drinking water?
Yes,
Okay, so that's 3,000 gallons a minute that's the equivalent of one nice big well, isn't it? Or is that maybe 2 wells?
Looking at you two.
That I don't know, I've never looked at our well capacity.
aren't they like 1,200?
That's 2 wells.
Our
Okay,
wells pump around 1,300 gallons a minute right now, our bigger wells.
okay, yeah. So that would be available for Lake Elmo or Oakdale and Woodbury, or how would you distribute
None of
that?
this would be distributed between Oakdale and Lake Elmo,
Okay, so not Woodbury.
not Woodbury.
Okay, so we would be able to split that capacity.
Yes.
Would that be allocated by the DNR?
Yeah,
Randall Doneen, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. I mean, you would need an authorized permit to pump that water out, so
Yeah.
they would need to be allocated for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Hannah, could you pop that last PDF you had back up, please?
this one?
I don't see it, is it? There we go.
There we are.
No, next one, that one. Okay. Just needed to get one piece of information there, thanks.
Yes, and just one of the scenarios we are considering as well would just be for Lake Elmo and would not include that West Lakeland and Oakdale components as well.
Okay.
But like I said, the wells, it would include basically these wells
Right.
that would be in the city.
Great, thanks.
Would this money be coming from the 3M settlement funds?
That is something that we'd have to look into. We're gonna have a great presentation tomorrow at our work group meeting, that's talking about future funding and projected, funding that is left. So it's quite a bit of money, so it's not enough that we had allotted initially in that drinking water, protection allotment. So we'd have to find some other source for that. But something we've been looking into.
And how does this interplay with the White Bear Lake Comprehensive Water Plan that I attend? Because obviously we're looking at a different solution hoping to get a study back by the spring of 2027.
Yeah, it is really kind of two separate efforts at that point. We do have folks that represent the MPC that attend those meetings to try and understand what those other options are and if this one could be included in that. But it hasn't really gone anywhere yet at this point that I understand.
What type of effect would these array wells have on White Bear Lake levels? And would the DNR even permit them if they theoretically draw down the lake? That'd be a DNR question. I apologize. I mean, I know this is all
We want to have
intertwined
the
between the
experts.
three of you, so I apologize for that
We're
question.
here.
You might be able to speak to the modeling too.
Yeah. So, currently under the existing district court order, we have standing commitments that we need to complete. And until those are complete, we can't authorize any water that will additionally draw down the lake. Now, we've been speaking with Andrea and their team about when they get to a certain point in development, they should bring the multi-benefit array to us. We can run it through the model and kind of see what impact we have. The benefit is that you would no longer be pumping your annual allocation that you have, and it would be coming out of this. But we would, because the wells are in different places, and they'd be pumping, Oakdale and injecting some of it, we'd really need to take a look at what that. But the idea being the 2027 comprehensive plan will lay out the pathway so that we can authorize additional water without impacting the lake. And so that's the goal of the 2027 water supply plan.
Okay. Thank you.
I guess just going on to that, where these wells are located within that 5-mile buffer. You can see some of them do sit right on that edge, and we could move them accordingly. But like Randall said, we will be having them run that through as well, their model. And then I did have a map on here that did show the model we have, that drawdown. And there is some drawdown around the wells, as would be expected, but it doesn't extend to our model boundaries. And so it's kind of this model versus the DNRs and just the area. So we'll just kind of have to wait and see on that one. That is all I have on the well array. So I don't know, I have more information on the SAF and what we've been seeing there, but I didn't know if we should pause, if there was any more discussion
Yeah,
there.
just a question, you said your model versus the DNR, oh. I'm muted. You said your model versus the DNR model, so are you guys working off of different models for the water flow?
Yes, so the model that's Project 1007 specific has a different domain, and then just takes into account, the goal is to have it be an integrated surface water, groundwater model, just since we do have so many PFAS impacts in that surface water that are then migrating. So with the purpose being different, they just take slightly different inputs, and then on the map, the model domain does not, that AECOM developed, does not extend to White Bear Lake, because that's outside of the Project 1007 and the PFAS impacts.
Yeah. Councilmember Baxter.
So just for clarity, because the water stuff's very complicated and there's multiple groups working on it. And so I'm trying to understand how what's being presented here tonight connects with all the other work in the models and I think all the things that Administrator Schroeder brought up. For cities, it's really complicated as to what direction we're going and when, and if we're working on different models. Are you guys as agencies working together on this on behalf of the cities, or is it left to the cities to then figure it out in the end?
Yeah, that's a great question. It is definitely complicated. So we have been working closely and our consultants with the DNR. the main person that does the modeling over there has seen their model and kind of critiqued it, and they've gone back and forth. So there's definitely communication between us and the DNR. And I would say as well, the efforts that Hannah and her team are going through now is really focused on Project 1007 and the feasibility study overall. So it's trying to understand what potential remedies might work to clean up the huge area of contamination. So this is kind of one piece of it that this would do. It's intended to remediate the plume or at least hold it in place and help clean it up. And then there's these additional benefits that could help out Lake Elmo and Oakdale. But yeah, there are several other efforts that Mr. Schroeder did mention as well. So I think there's communication with those work groups that are existing out there, and then our own work group as well. But yeah, there definitely needs to be continued communication for that.
Councilmember Holt.
So are there two models, or is there also the third that Wood made for the settlement work group? Or is that the one that you're referring to that MPCA is using?
I think that's a third one as far as I know. But a lot of it has similar information that goes into it. I think it depends on, at least with their model, with the AECOMs that they're doing for us, it includes surface water and groundwater, and it gets into more detail than some of the other models. The one that Wood did was a much bigger area, and it wasn't quite as detailed, so it gives you different information. It's all useful.
And I guess my concern then is, say, one of these solutions is acted upon, whether it's with the White Bear Lake Group in 2027 or through this with settlement dollars. Which one is the district court for the model going to pay attention to? If one model says, MPCA's model or Wood's model says this actually doesn't impact the lake, but the DNR's model says it does. Again, hypothetically, because we don't know, and they are similar, but I get there's slightly different inputs, slightly different purpose. One is for 1007, one is for the plume overall, one was for the lake. I get that. But from our end, it makes it very difficult to make well, I'm ranting, it's not your fault, but it makes it very difficult to make informed decisions when there's three different ways to model it.
Yeah, and hopefully they'd all point at least in the general same direction. But yeah, I think that's more assessment that we'd have to do in communication with DNR as well, to see what would be a good approach.
Yes, Administrator.
What's the, you talked about Project 1007, that's the project from 1987 concerning water movement through Lake Elmo to limit high water levels. I'm assuming that has turned into a superhighway of PFAS contamination. So what is the plan for not only cleaning the water within the 1007 plan, but also most likely a few decades of sediment that's in these waterways?
That's a great question, and that will all be a part of the feasibility study. There's a whole series of alternatives that get evaluated, and that will be included. I don't know if there's any, I'm not sure if we can speak to much detail yet, because we're still completing it now.
You're thinking about it.
Yes.
Complicated.
So, just recently, some attention was brought to Lake Elmo itself and being very polluted with PFAS. Do any of these kind of circulation methods, does that help any of the overland water contamination for lakes and streams?
Yeah, do you want to speak to the interconnectedness?
Yeah. So yes, in the feasibility study, once again, we are considering surface water as well and looking at how to start addressing that. And then also, the Lake Elmo in particular is large, since it's largely fed by groundwater and impacted groundwater. This well array and any efforts to clean up the groundwater would help stop that migration of PFAS as it enters the lake.
Okay.
So that connection especially is there from the Washington County landfill and the remaining impacts, not that it's still coming from that landfill, but just those remaining deeper impacts that are coming from that area.
Thank you.
We definitely see that migrating from that landfill through Sunfish Lake and into Lake Elmo.
Right. Thanks.
Should the citizens of Lake Elmo be concerned at all about water advisories in surface water, such as swimming in lakes? Is there any advice for that you can give our citizens?
So the water in Lake Elmo is not above the drinking, the surface water criteria for swimming. Further upstream in Raleigh Creek, there are exceedances
Yeah.
for that.
Is there a difference in levels between drinking water and surface water as far as what's an acceptable level of PFAS? Could you tell me the level of surface water acceptability?
Yeah, yep, because it depends on, who or what it impacts. So a lot of the surface water criteria is because of fish impacts, whereas drinking water is for humans. So
Yeah.
it just depends on the end user, yeah.
Okay.
And swimming is going to be different than obviously drinking, just from that
Yeah.
consumption.
Councilmember Dragisich.
What do you do with the PFAS that's extracted by your process?
Yeah, so I think that's go into the SAF.
That's a segue into SAF.
Smooth transition.
So this gets into the pilot study we have been doing out at Tablin Park. And I should say, as a part of the feasibility study, we are considering other treatment options as well. You know, the more traditional GAC, ion exchange. But the MPCA wanted to pilot a surface active foam fractionation system. So this, instead of using a kind of a solid media that the PFAS sorbs to, this really just injects air and causes the PFAS to foam. And then that foam can be removed, and the result is much lower PFAS concentrations coming out of the unit. So just kind of how the SAF works, if you've seen it at Tablin Park, it's just a big blue container. But inside of it, there is 3 different vessels. 2 of those are for primary fractionation, where the goal is to reduce those effluent PFAS concentrations. And this is just injecting air around the bottom, causing that foam to form. It gets lifted up and out of a top cone, and then that's concentrated. And then the secondary fractionation is really to concentrate that PFAS then for disposal or destruction. So the more we can get it concentrated, the less expensive it's going to be to treat it and destroy it or dispose of it downstream. So we, I know this is a lot of data, but just in case you were interested in kind of seeing what those concentrations were looking like at the effluent. So at the SAF, we have piloted off of the Shakopee Aquifer, the Jordan Aquifer, and then Raleigh Creek. The Jordan at Tablin is much less impacted than the Shakopee. But this treating at the Shakopee kind of gives us an idea, if you did have those higher PFAS concentrations, what would removal be like? So just kind of drawing your attention to PFOA, which is here, and then PFOS at the bottom. You can see these effluent concentrations. We're actually able to get PFOA down to below detection limits, and then PFOS very close to the MDH HPV in Hurl. So no, we don't think that the SAF could be used exclusively for drinking water treatment, but this does show that you could remove a lot of that PFAS and potentially greatly reduce costs associated with your granular activated carbon or ion exchange media. And once again, part of the analysis, kind of the next step is to take this water and do those column studies and say just how much media would you need, and what would those that cost offset be by installing the SAF as a pretreatment for drinking water treatment prior to a media filtration. And then looking at Raleigh Creek, once again, we saw really good removal, low PFOA that met the surface water criteria, and then PFOS did not meet the surface water criteria, but once again, we saw, over 99% reduction. So that is a lot of removal out of that surface water that then is infiltrating to the groundwater and getting into the drinking water. So that's kind of the update on the SAF. And I guess what's going from there, so once you get it into that concentrate, which we've produced probably about 10 drums during this pilot study.
And how big is a drum?
55 gallons, so
Okay.
about, yes, a little bit We have also looked at different destruction technologies and have the MPCA sent some of this concentrate to different vendors to do lab-based testing, and then we also did one pilot testing with the technology here. And they look promising, and it's just those technologies are all in development. So we're still sifting through all the data and potentially going to do some more pilot studies.
What kind of methodologies is used to destroy forever chemicals?
Yeah, so there is, I think there's 5 different methods. So one is electrochemical oxidation, kind of just zapping it with the electricity between 2 electrodes, and that removes the fluorine. Supercritical water oxidation, which is just heating it up under pressure, causes all organic chemicals actually to be destroyed. Plasma treated, there's some different chemical reactions using UV light that can be cause the destruction, and then kind of a variation off of the supercritical water oxidation under higher pHs, but then requires less of a pressure and temperature increase. So
Are they destroying the long chain and creating multiple short chains, or what is the end result if are we stripping it all the way down to the atomic level?
So one, that's a hard question to answer because of analytical methods, and anyone that claims to destroy all PFAS, they're not measuring for everything. So especially those 2 and 3 carbon.
Yeah, you're just making shorter and shorter ones, which have probably a lesser lifespan, or they're not forever anymore.
Yes, or they might not bioaccumulate to the same way that like PFOS and PFOA do.
Okay.
But yes, that's a question that's still out there, and something that if we do additional testing would be incorporated into that.
How long do you anticipate the SAF system to be in a pilot mode?
Yeah, so we are talking with the MPCA about what the next steps are for that. We have learned a lot with it operating at Tablin Park, and we're in the process of figuring out where it should go next. The main reason for leaving at Tablin right now is we are capturing some of that PFAS as it is continuing to migrate downstream. So anytime Raleigh Creek is flowing, we are treating that water. It is not a big enough system to treat all of it, especially during those snow melts and in those kind of very high rain events, but we are treating a substantial portion of it. So leaving it there, at least through the spring, allowed us to remove some of that PFAS and prevent that continued downgrading.
And the excess water coming out of the SAF system goes back into Riley Creek, or is it injected back into the aquifer?
Goes back to Raleigh Creek.
Okay.
Yeah, immediately downstream of where we take it. So.
Any other questions? Thanks, Anna. Is there anything further from the MPCA, or does that kind of cover everything? All right.
The Randall is from the DNR is here also if there's any questions just for council and citizens. We're expecting a ruling from Judge Lippman concerning the contested case hearing concerning the allocation level for White Bear Lake, and that has not come back. We anticipated it here, and that's why I invited Randall. Thank you for coming out. We appreciate that. But if there are any questions for him, he is free to take questions too.
Not until we hear anything, otherwise it's just same old, same old.
Yeah, the date for the order is tomorrow, so we'll see if it comes out. We'll take a look at it. There is a process where the DNR can submit exceptions to the order. So depending on what it says, we may or may not submit exceptions. If we do, the judge may or may not consider those objections.
I do have one question. Somebody had indicated that Do the residents that live on White Bear Lake Avenue have legal authority to draw water directly from White Bear Lake, say to, if they have a Sandpoint well for their yards?
They, the way the water appropriation works, you have to have a riparian right. And for groundwater, you just gotta, live above it, right? Live above the
Okay.
groundwater. For surface water, you have to have adjacent, you have to have riparian property. If so, you can appropriate water from the
Alright.
lakes.
Okay.
Have you settled with, on the conditions, the 4 main conditions that were given, have you settled with any cities and have they accepted these conditions?
Very good question, Clark. We have, in concept, settled with a handful of cities. We don't actually have written settlement agreements with any of them. We just recently, I think it was just Friday, I think, we submitted a memo to Judge Littman updating where we were on that. And I'm gonna get the cities wrong. I think it's, Shoreview, or no, Stillwater, North St. Paul. Oh, I'm gonna forget, there's another 2, I can't remember, that have accepted the conditions that we had, and they're probably gonna be removed in the order when it comes down.
So if they're not been accepted yet, and the ruling comes down tomorrow?
Well, the ones that have accepted, but we don't have written settlements
Right.
from anybody yet.
Okay.
Okay. Councilmember
In
Holtz.
concept, I guess is the best way to describe it.
So last time that, there was a couple of us that went down to Ramsey County Courthouse, the last time there was a hearing, and lawyers for Stillwater were there asking to get an exception so they didn't have to pay to move their well to be outside the 5 mile, and she took it under consideration. Has anything happened since that point?
All the parties have agreed to the hardship case, and so we were fine with Stillwater being removed, those conditions being removed. We'll see what the judge says.
So a question on that, in terms of, because the parties are DNR and the homeowners associations, the groups representing the shoreline owners, how would that process work for who at DNR then made the decision to say, we support that? Does that go all the way up to the commissioner level?
Yeah, but I should back up, the parties are the cities and the DNR. And then the homeowners association has just joined as like a, I don't know if they're like an amicus or whatever like that. So they just joined. So they're, they're helping negotiate any of the settlements, working on, hey, that works for us, because they're still working under the district court order. But yeah, anything that when we had the settlement discussions, that were down at the, I don't know if they were at the courthouse, but we were down there when all the cities were in, we had Deputy Commissioner Naramore in the room and Assistant Commissioner Richards. And they brought the proposals in and we assessed whether they were good enough. And, for Stillwater, the cost of moving the well, a matter of feet was huge. And it's like, we had already said that you should make the case, the hardship case, that the conditions aren't warranted because of how close you are outside the 5 miles, which they did.
Well, and as I recall, their hardship when they were at the courthouse in front of Judge Marion, their complaint was DNR's data shows if we moved it outside the 5 mile, it has no significant impact on our draw from the lake.
It wouldn't change it.
So has that same analysis been done for our well that is within the 5 miles? Because it's not as close as Stillwater's, but it's still
Oh, yeah, we've
significantly.
analyzed your guys' wells.
And I take it, in the hypothetical of it being moved, we would still not significantly change our draw?
Yeah, we haven't looked at a new location of wells. If you did move them, we would have to do that. Moving further away from the lake does help, for sure.
It was our understanding from Jack's city engineer testimony that the well within the 5 mile radius over a 20-year period would give, and correct me if I'm wrong here, it's like 2 or 3 hundredths of an inch over a 20-year period of drawdown of the lake.
1/10 of 1 inch.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the engineer.
1/10 of 1 inch over a 20-year period.
Yeah, you know, we do have, I mean, I'm sure you've seen this presentation at the water supply planning.
Yeah, the White Bear White one, too, yeah.
But we analyzed all the city's wells and analyzed which ones are having the biggest impact. And I forget where Lake Elmo was. I think you were like 9th or something like that.
We're less than Woodbury,
Yeah,
who is not a party
yeah, so
to
with
the
the 5
impact.
miles, yeah.
Has the golf clubs, golf courses, are they part of this lawsuit, and have they settled?
Yeah, we have a settlement proposal for them. We haven't heard back from them on they proposed some conditions, and they were reasonable, but they weren't what you would call permit conditions. So we took what they had and we wrote them as permit conditions, and then gave them back to them, and we haven't heard back from the golf courses as of yet.
If the lake was below 923.5, would they have the same total irrigation ban as city residents?
Residential irrigation, only if they serve residences. And the settlement proposal that they had, I'm not gonna get it, they had a bunch of series of conditions on how their water use would ramp down based at the different elevations of the lake. And so it's not the same.
Was it also indicated about the moisture level in the soil
Yeah,
as well? And
yeah, and then they
whether it was
mow
fairway
higher,
or,
and, yeah, and they would only water certain areas, and they just ramped it down tighter and tighter the lower the lake got.
Hand talking's difficult with microphones.
Yeah, sorry, I keep on hitting that.
It's all right, it's all right.
So I guess my underlying question with some of those questions I had was, would DNR provide the same level of support for Lake Elmo that they did for Stillwater if the data showed that us paying to move the well is moot because the impact doesn't change?
Well, remember, the contested case that they're getting out of isn't about how much water they're pumping. It's about those 4 court-ordered conditions that went on everybody within 5 lakes. So, you know, moving away from the lake to reduce it, that's certainly one of the options that can be considered, but it's not like you're gonna get to a zero-sum game. And so it's not like we're saying, well, Stillwater, moving it out, you know, it wasn't about the lake level, because it's not gonna change. They're having the impact, they're gonna have the impact. It's whether or not those 4 permit conditions should maintain on their permit. And we were fine with them being removed from those 4 permit conditions.
Yes, so by them making the argument that they shouldn't need to move it, and DNR supported it, those 4 requirements are no longer applicable to Stillwater.
Well, we'll see what the court, if they get.
Could you list the 4 conditions for the audience here?
Oh, sure. Yeah, should have, I actually have. So that I can actually. All right. Ramsey Court District Order, plan to convert to surface water. A revised water supply plan must be submitted to the DNR by June 30th, 2027. That date has been changed. Like this is the draft permit. Clark. It includes a contingency plan to fully or partially convert the source water that is authorized another permit from groundwater to surface water sources. The contingency plan must include a schedule for funding, design, construction, and conversion to a surface water supply. Whether any conversion would occur shall be determined by the DNR and the holder of the permit. So that's condition 1. That's the conversions in. Condition number 2, residential irrigation ban. You read the details of that, or you know what it is. When it
Yeah.
drops below, the permittee must prepare and enact and enforce a residential irrigation ban when notified by the DNR that the lake level of White Bear Lake has fallen below 923.5 feet, to continue until notified by the DNR that the lake level has reached an elevation of 924 feet. By October 3rd, send the DNR your approved ordinance or other enforceable mechanism for implementing the irrigation ban consistent with this permit condition, and they give you a site where you can look at lake levels. So that's the irrigation ban. And then the last is the per capita use plan. If you're not familiar with the per capita use, it's a way of calculating based on population how much water you use. by some date, you have to submit an enforceable plan to the DNR to phase down per capita residential water use to 75 gallons per day and total per capita use for 90 gallons per day. And those are the, oh, so I'm sorry. The last one was this report on collaborative efforts. Annual reporting to the DNR is required on your collaborative efforts within the Northeast metro communities to develop plans to phase down per capita residential use to 75 gallons and the total to 90. So that's just reporting on your collaboration efforts.
So to get down to the 7590, would the DNR support us approving 6,000 apartments, which average around 35 gallons per day on modern apartments, in order to build our way down to 7590? Would that be an advisable plan?
We're not land use planners. I think what we've been telling communities is they should stick with whatever their land use planning efforts they think is best for their community. Obviously, smaller lot sizes are gonna be easier to get to that 7590 than larger lot sizes.
Right. Yeah, Councilmember Beckstrom.
Just one clarifying question, and this is in follow-up to the mayor's earlier question about residents drawing from the lake itself.
Sure.
And I'm not sure if I heard clearly what the answer, it was a little complicated.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, I'm just not, that's just not my forte. So did I understand correctly that residents, the homeowners can draw from the lake?
They have a riparian right, they can. Now, the question is, do you need DNR authorization to do it? And it depends. If you're doing less than 10,000 gallons per day and 1 million gallons a year, you don't need our authorization to do it.
So just a follow-up question to that. So if there's an all-out residential irrigation ban, does that mean those homeowners are not able to draw water from the lake? If we can't water here, are they able to water their lawns from the lake up
Well,
there?
since they don't have the permit condition, they won't have that residential irrigation ban, you know?
So they would be able to continue to have green lawns up there?
Mhm.
Okay. That's what I was, thank you.
Yep. The irony is rich.
All right, any more questions for Mr. Randall? Thank you.
Thank you for that.
I did have one question for the MPCA. Recently, it's been noted that some wells in Hastings and Stillwater were getting some of these PFAS hits, right? Is that migration or is that just from a different source? I'm just curious.
That is the question, I would say. That's something that we're
Okay,
trying to
that you
determine
guys are looking
ourselves.
at? Okay. Because I know it's happening in other parts of the country and other areas of Minnesota, so, yeah, all right, thank you. Yes, Councilmember Holt.
I guess this would be for MPCA, because you've been working with multiple cities for distribution of settlement dollars. And I'm just curious, has there been a way to make the process as efficient as possible to make sure that even before we apply for a grant to pay for our labor, that we're already not losing money paying for our labor to write the grant to pay for our labor? Because there's that balance. We are going to be applying for grants for years to come, but we only have one engineer and a couple people who work for him. And he is responsible for the entire city to begin with. We're not Woodbury or Cottage Grove with that type of scale. So I'm just wondering, are there solutions or ideas that can help with that gap filling?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think we've had success with some other communities when they've had kind of an overall administrative grant. I believe we're getting one in place right now. I think it sounds like it's pretty detailed to be for a lot of Mr. Schroeder's time. But maybe something like that could be expanded to include that additional time that it takes to actually apply and use the grant form. So you could do an overarching grant essentially. As long as you could like justify it to some degree, say we're estimating this much time for a person over this year, just an estimate would be adequate, then we could put that into place.
And you're calling that an administrative grant?
Mm-hmm,
Okay.
yep.
Yeah, and we basically, that's up for approval for you for next Tuesday. I wrote it for $60,000 to run until, I think, the end of 28 maybe? I can't remember the date. But we're basically be tracking office time, my time, finances time to help with this. Are you saying maybe it might be prudent for us, once we get this grant in place, to seek an amendment to this to add, let's say, possible future grant application writing time?
Yeah, and I think I would house it as something that's administrative effort that your community will have to go through in order to help fix or treat the PFAS. So I think that's enough related that your team working on those efforts is something that could be covered by the settlement.
All right, I'll try to figure that out before I leave here. Last question for you. We have 2 neighborhoods that I believe Jack has said are more or less pre-approved, let's say, for city water due to PFAS issues. Are those grants something that we'll be writing, or is that something that's like pre-approved, or what's the process for that?
We'd need a new grant form for those. Yeah,
Okay,
we'd
so-
wanna get the details. So the high-level plan was worked out in the conceptual plan itself. And those costs were kind of built in all at the beginning. Of course, we know the costs have all changed now, but that's something we'd look to get from you is the details on what you actually need to.
Because I think we have one neighborhood scheduled in the CIP for next summer, 25. So if we start writing that grant with engineering time, I could conceivably add that to my administrative grant.
That, yeah, conceivably, that one might be a little easier tracking wise to do separate. Sometimes it's nice, I guess, if we can do a construction grant separate from an administrative, just for tracking purposes. I mean, we can work with you if you find it better.
Well,
but-
but I mean, just writing the grant, because
Oh, yes,
obviously,
yes,
we're gonna,
yes.
because my understanding is, for that neighborhood, we're gonna need to write a grant
Mm-hmm.
to get that done.
Yes.
Well, that costs us money to do that, and if we can't bill for any of that time writing the grant, unless we add it to the administrative grant.
Yes, you could use time in that administrative grant to write that grant.
That's what I wanted to
Yep,
hear,
you
and
got
you're on tape here, by the way, too, so.
Great.
Stand by.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time. All right, next on the agenda, and certainly don't feel like you need to stay, because this stuff really doesn't apply to what you came for, but you're more than welcome to, if you're just interested.
Thank you for coming out.
Open Space Planned Unit Development Ordinance Review. Director Stopa.
All right, we're here talking about the open space plan unit development. This has been mentioned a couple times. We have 2 applicants that are seeking to build an open space plan unit development, and we were also, the question was, can we do more to promote open space plan unit developments? So what is an open space plan unit development? The easiest way to pretty much talk about it is the features of the development. It has to have rural zoning, a 20-acre minimum. The open space is 50% open space. There are buffers on property lines. Right now, it's large lots, 1 acre, minimum half-acre lot. It's mostly single-family. You can have townhouses. It's all either on individual septic or communal septic. And then the existing density is 0.5 units per acre. That density is set when you run the calculations at an acre lot, including the roadway, and then with 50% open space. Half-acre lots are allowed, and we do see developments with half-acre lots that exist currently, and that density would be maxed out at 0.87 units per acre with an open space, 50% open space. So as you can see, we have 18 existing open space developments in Lake Elmo. What we are showing in this chart is basically, we have typical lot widths. They're all over 100 feet. They do range depending on the development. You have different size lots. The depths are usually at least 200 feet deep and the lots vary from half an acre to over an acre. And they're pretty much in sequence of lot widths and sizing. We highlighted those, I believe that's 5, because some of them are below 100 feet in width. So this map is a little bit difficult to read, but it's possible open space PUD parcels. Basically, anything that's green or tan is over 20 acres and is zoned appropriately for an open space PUD. So I just wanted to kind of show a site plan. This is from Fields of St. Croix. 120-foot lots typically, maximum depth, some are over 400 feet. The average depth is 300 feet. But you can see on the left, there's open space, pretty typical. I think it's pretty typical, this in Tapestry, of kind of that rural feel. Open space has a very rural feel when you drive through it. I think some of them are a little bit more urban. But this is a good example of what exists in Lake Elmo. So what I wanted to talk about is just other examples and some differences. So I don't know if any of you have been to Jackson Meadow, but this is we're in St. Croix. And I bring this up because it's more about cluster development, and that is something that we hear about. It exists elsewhere. And Jackson Meadow is an example where you have 70% open space. So the idea is that the code, instead of having a typical design where you have maybe a 2-acre lot, you can have open space that's shared, but much smaller lots. I wanted to show these are available lots there. It's just showing that some of them are 90 by 150, so they're smaller than our typical lot size. But you can see on the north part, they have very large lots. So it mixes depending on the home buyer. This example I wanted to bring up, this is actually outside of Atlanta. I've been to this development. It's called Serenbe. I think Atlanta and Minneapolis have a couple things in common, especially Lake Elmo in this area. It's 30 miles from Atlanta. Lake Elmo is 25 from Minneapolis. Atlanta has 5 million people. Minneapolis has 4 million. So what happened here is a person went out and bought several hundred acres of property in the early 2000s, and then saw development coming close and wanted to prevent it. He wanted this rural lifestyle. So they created a development of 1,000 acres with potential for 400 units. And what it is, it's smaller lots, it's 70% open space, and it's also mixed use. I bring this up because, one, it's a cluster open space development. It's a really successful model. What ended up happening, so you could see kind of the lots. You have the larger lots that are still only about 8,000 square feet, and they get smaller. And the red is the town center, so the yellow is the lighter lots, the larger lots. You see types of housing there. I think the house on the left, I think both of these are for sale. That's 800,000, the other one's $1 million. But what happened was he really wanted to save the area from typical development and have a rural lifestyle for people living outside of Atlanta. And they got together and were able to convince the property owners that they should put this into, create a new city essentially, and hold 40,000 acres. So the conventional zoning, because they went ahead and changed the zoning. So the conventional zoning would have allowed 80% development with 30,000 houses. The new model is 30% of the land is used with 38,000 houses. So there's even more land, houses. And I think the quote here is that there's a 60% savings on infrastructure costs, because that was a discussion of how do we save money and for the developers to come and build an open space product, which is, I think it's a product that people in Lake Elmo really want to see more of. I also wanted to bring up Wildflower because it has the smaller lots, has the alley parking. Serenbe in Atlanta is basically all alley parking too. There's a lot of open space in Wildflower, even though it's not an open space development. So this is the 4th edition. I think they call them villas. This is more of a cluster development. So the key points we want to talk about and really ask questions is, should we be considering cluster versus traditional? And when I say traditional, I just mean like the code that we have currently, right? Half-acre lots. Do we want to see if we have cluster open space would increase if the if lots, decrease. Also density, we need to talk about density, because I think that's really important moving forward. Lot sizes, should we have different lot sizes? Should we have rear loaded and cut down on the frontage, which could save money? Buffers, I think we need to redefine the buffers, because they're a little confusing, so we want input on that. Street widths, trails and sidewalks, and then impervious surface. So this is a cluster versus traditional OP development. So if you look at the 50% open, and this is assuming that an acre site has a 207.8 foot frontage, you could have 0.43 units per acre, and the code is 0.45. This is assuming a 60-foot right-of-way, and this is maxed out per the calculation. Half acre, it's 0.87, and then 1,600 square feet is 1.15, and if you go smaller to 80 by 60 lots, it's 1.43. The reason that's highlighted is, would you like to see an increase in density, but also scale the open space if you allow for smaller lots? So buffers is currently, they're 200 feet adjacent to all non-OPPDs. It's 100 if you're next to a current or eligible OPPD. But if you have an OPPD that has a greater than 100 or 200, you have to match that. So there's kind of goofy standards. Also, what we saw too, buffers could also be part of the buildable lot. It was kind of hard to track. It's something I think we would want to get away from. One of the things that we're proposing is just 100-foot buffers from all adjacent properties, and also a 200-foot buffer from any existing residential dwelling units within a budding residential development. That way you protect, farm properties that are adjacent to these developments. But we definitely want input on that.
So
Is that good?
your proposed is buffers cannot be part of a buildable lot.
That is something that's up for, we want to hear from the council on that, because some of them are part of the lot, which increases the lot size, but then it's not part of the buildable area.
So basically, you'd reduce the buffer from 100 feet to 200 feet, but then the buildable lot's gonna be 100 feet from the development line, and then the property lot's then 100 feet from that development line, is it?
Yeah, so you'd have the development line,
Yeah.
the outside boundary,
Yeah.
and then the actual property line would be, it would be 100 feet from that point.
And then that's the start of the lot.
That's the start of the lot.
Okay.
Because what developers have done also, it's not necessarily a bad outcome. They'll use that part of the lot and leave trees in that section, and they
Sure.
may put a specific covenant on that. I'm not sure if they put it on the lot, but you do
Okay.
see sections that are still wooded and they're still buffered. So I
Yeah.
think they met the spirit of the buffer, but it's a little bit more difficult to calculate and track.
So then what's the 200-foot buffer from all existing residential dwellings?
Yeah, within a budding residential development. So the idea is if someone has a farm property that has a house near a property line, you have to buffer 200 feet. It's to protect that resident.
Just from that one house or the whole property?
I would say just from that one house. So you would draw it out from the house and then
Okay.
go back to 100 feet.
All right.
But if you feel like 200 feet is, for everything, then
No, I've often thought sometimes our buffers get a little, it's just in this day and age with with some of our properties, the build out, it just doesn't seem doable in some stances, which is, maybe that's the way it should be, but, yeah.
well, it's important also for the 100-foot buffer or 200, whatever it is, that it provides that boundary and green
Yeah.
space between.
Yeah.
So it's just a matter of the number. And also, just remember that there's also flexibility when you go through an individual plan unit development. If you like the plan unit development, you think it works, you can reduce the buffer. So this is conversations with developers, the two developers, just listening to them and meeting with them. Also talking to engineering, public works and other staff. We seem to hear that people want to build a 28-foot wide street. That's preferred. That actually is allowed. It's just parking on one side.
Right.
So we want to put that in as a minimum standard in the OPPD so people understand when they apply that this is the code they should read.
Well, I think that's important, but also to explain that it's parking on one side.
Mhm.
Because I think some of the places where we've restricted it to parking on one side is something that's come after the fact, right? And so people were used to parking wherever they wanted.
Mhm.
And then we go through and we redo the road, say a little bit, and then we put up no parkings on one side, and that creates a lot of, hey, wait a minute, now you're changing the rules on me, which I get it, you know, and most of it's for, public safety for our fire trucks and the width on the road, so it makes sense, but, you know, it's just something that would need to be clear in that you can have parking on one side of the road in those instances.
Okay. Retain curb and gutter. So that came up. That was requested to remove curb and gutter.
It was,
My opinion-
it was requested to
Well,
remove.
it came up from a developer, could we remove curb and gutter? It's expensive. So we wanted to, I asked, right? So I've been, it looks a lot better with the curb and gutter. The homes are fairly, you know, you're looking at $800 million houses. The
It's
edges
the crust, it's the crust on the bread that keeps the dough from falling out. It keeps it together. Yeah, go ahead,
So
Councilman.
just a clarifying question. So as we're going through this, you're referencing developers a lot. And so as you're going through this exercise, are we changing our open space PUD for developers? Or are we changing it because that's what our community would like to see? I think I brought it up at the last meeting. I'm genuinely concerned of this direction we're going, where we seem to be bending over backwards to get developers what they want, and maybe not going back to our guiding documents that were created by our community specific to open space. So just, how are you balancing that with the recommendations, I guess, might be the question.
I think we're taking their comments into consideration because we were asked to talk to them and hear them out and see what is driving up cost. I don't think this, to me, this isn't driven by the developers.
But you've brought that up several times
Yeah.
here, that
Well, I
in
think-
talking with the developers, they wanted a certain thing.
Oh.
Or the costs for the developers, and so I guess with the open space PUD, it's called out quite extensively in our comprehensive plan, and it's what makes Lake Elmo unique. And we do have some open space developments that are clustered, per our comp plan. And so are we being asked to make changes to an ordinance because today, with the environment, with the market, that this is what is attractive to developers? Or do we go back to our comprehensive plan that had our residents weighing in on what Lake Elmo should look like, regardless of whether a developer can make it work or not?
Yeah.
I would say that our last comp plan had very little community input in it whatsoever. It was driven mostly by a consultant that was done at that time. And so this, when did the open space PUD get developed? 2000 what? Anybody know?
I don't know.
It's been a long time.
It's been a while.
20 years.
Yeah.
And so I think I asked, I said, could we look at our open space PUD? Because, and does it make sense? And some of it makes sense. But I want to try and get something that makes sense without having requests for variance after variance after variance. Just like we should probably look at some of the densities with shoreland overlay. And does that density make sense there, or should we make it denser in another location and make it, you know, in the case of the one that wanted to have all those variances over there, well, why can't we have something where it makes sense to build it that way and still get our open space and be able to do. I have concerns in a lot of our open space, and it's from the community septic standpoint. So I'd like to see how we can address that, because it's Fields of St. Croix, it's Tapestry, it's Sanctuary. Carriage Station is an open space, but these community septics are not working out. So that's kind of the whole part of the gamut. So it's not, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, Director Stopa, but it's trying to get the information on people that work on those and then come to council and ask us, do these make sense? It's not that, we don't have to change anything, right?
I guess I would just engage the community, and I think while you say not many people participated, I would probably disagree with that, as there were over 200 people that participated in some way in the comp plan. And so with this, and I certainly understand the community septic standpoint, I know we're rescuing a number of those, but are these open space areas that we have left, are they all in the MUSA? And if they're not, are we planning to put them in the MUSA?
These are not in the MUSA.
So, I mean, how does this solve that? Are we
I'm
putting
not,
them in the
I'm
MUSA?
just bringing up other things that we need to think about that have changed in the last 20 years. Because these community septics went in the early 2000s, Councilmember Beckstrom, and I would say 200 people is really not a big demographic when you come to the city of Lake Elmo and the participation in a comp plan that's over 20 years for our community. It's not.
Well, we've used a 30-person survey to say we need baseball fields, so, I mean, it's all,
Oh, I think we
it's all what we all in
I think we
perspective.
discounted that, so I think you're completely wrong on that.
I would disagree.
Well, of course
But
you
in
would.
any case,
So I guess, I just want you to make this clear, like, I personally like the open space PUD and the planning that goes behind it. And when I looked at this, can we make them even better? Are there different options that are similar to open space PUD, like a cluster development? Can we have even more open space and make it a different product that maybe is a slightly more affordable product, like a $500,000, $600,000 home? So,
in today's day. But this is long-term too, and that's my concern, is are we changing things because the market today is dictating one thing versus long-term? I mean, are we trying to adjust for these two developers to develop?
I would say we definitely are not doing that. I reviewed this in a way that, can we create even a better product for residents and people to come here, essentially? Like, are we gonna have more developments that people wanna buy into? Can we have a more affordable product, $500,000-$600,000 product for people, for families? Can we cut costs where it should be cut? You know, I mean, those are the questions. And like for the curb and gutter, we're recommending retaining it because there's problems eliminating it. So that was something that was brought up by a developer that we talked about and clearly said, no, we do not want to eliminate that standard. But 28-foot wide streets, it's already a standard. Sometimes it makes it a little bit more walkable, more residential feel than a wider street. If that makes it to where there's more of these developments, I think that's a good thing for Lake Elmo to have. It'd be great if the entire northeast side was all open space plan unit developments with trails that you could take and ride your bike down to the village. So I would like to see even more of them, and that's how I'm approaching it, not as doing things, on behalf of a developer. Also, part of the code cleanup is just making it easier for staff to review some of these projects too. So with the sidewalks and trails, we really wanted to promote the trails. Currently, the code requires, the way it's written, it basically at the end of the day requires a sidewalk on one side of the street, and then what you get is a trail on the other side of the street and then connections. We were discussing if we could just have trails, because we definitely want to retain trails, a very nice feature of an open space plan unit development. But we're concerned about people not removing snow from the trail. That was a comment from Public Works. With a 28-foot wide street, we would like to see sidewalks clear so people aren't walking in the street, that sort of thing. So I don't know if there's any comments or questions related to the trails. impervious coverage, it's actually pretty confusing right now. It's 25% of the entire development. It's hard to regulate. It's also, when someone comes in and wants to get a permit after they move into a house and they want to add more concrete, it's hard to regulate. So in the office, we use 25% max per lot, and we want to just have that standard per lot. And then if the council wants to go with smaller lot sizes, we would increase it to 30 or whatever the council would like to see.
So question on the sidewalk and trail. So currently for this type of development, we're promoting a sidewalk and a trail adjacent to the house. So that means if I'm walking down the street, a sidewalk on one side and a trail on the other.
That's what happens because the code states that you have to have a trail the length of the center line of the entire street. So what people do is they build the trail plus trail connections because they're required to do that.
So then one homeowner has a sidewalk that they are responsible for per the code. One homeowner has a trail that they're not responsible for.
Right, so that is a question, that is something I would talk to more with engineering and public
Yeah.
works, but ultimately that is what is being built,
Yeah.
so.
And, well, I mean, we've had this conversation on council about this because multiple developments have asked to just have the sidewalk thing taken out of the ordinance, to have the city do it. And then we have many HOAs where they do the trails, but not the sidewalks because of that balance. I'm just curious what your thoughts would be from a planning perspective. You have a street with houses on both sides. Is there a planning value gain to having accessibility on both sides? And I know that sounds like kind of a weird question, but we're using we're using a bituminous path on one side and a sidewalk on the other. So we're already saying, well, one for one, not for the other. But is there a value gain just having it be on one side and we pick bituminous?
You'd still want a sidewalk on that street, concrete sidewalk, so it's maintained in the wintertime. Otherwise, right now, we get complaints.
So we pick sidewalk on one side.
But I would definitely not eliminate the trails, because I think that's one of the features where people can get out of these developments and connect to a larger network.
Yes, for like
Okay.
outside of the homes, but I'm thinking you're on your home street. What is the value gain of having a sidewalk and a trail on both sides? That, I guess I'm having a hard time
I
conceiving
mean, I would
that.
just say, it's just for people riding their bikes, it's a multi-use path. 8 feet is the minimum, so you really wouldn't want to encourage people to ride on the sidewalk and then potentially in a 28-foot wide street. And that's the comments that I heard from Public Works and Engineering.
All right, that clicks, thank you.
Excuse me,
Yes,
I think, the sidewalk on one side it's good to have sidewalks. In the development I'm in, we have sidewalks on one side. I think focusing the trails on a way to connect the communities and neighborhoods, and not so much as a trail on one side, sidewalk on the other, makes more sense to me. At any rate, I know in the Royal Club, they're building a lot of trails now, and so people can really walk and enjoy, not being mixed up with traffic and bikes and everything that goes with it. And I think that adds some aesthetic value and recreational value.
so I brought this up because it was discussed with the potential projects, just to evaluate the project. So these are the two actual projects. Don't want to get into too much detail, but calling one a cluster because one is smaller lots, it's 70 feet wide, and the other one is the traditional one. But to the left, you can see the current code, half acres, 21,780. We don't have minimum widths or depths. The setbacks, 30 foot in the front, 15 on the side, 20 in the rear. The potential changes would be, and this is up for discussion, would be if you wanted to have a cluster lot size and have more open space, but that would go down to 12,800 potentially, or it could be whatever you want to move it to. An 80-foot minimum, a 160-foot depth, and the same setbacks. This proposed development is 13,692. The minimum lot width is less than what would recommend, and the setbacks on the side are less. The other development is actually 1,600 square feet. So what we're talking about is, do we want to have like a cluster traditional, and then the lot sizes would change. And when you went to cluster, you would have to have more open space. So if we reduce the lot size to 16,000 square feet, This individual's proposing over 32,000. The minimum lot width, 100 feet, they're at 125, their depth is over 200, and their setbacks meet the 30, 15, 20.
Councilmember Holtz.
So, question on this. As I know on one of the earlier slides, you had mentioned, townhomes technically are allowable up to 25%, and we could, if there was a value gain for the city, adjust that as well. But as I'm thinking about this conceptually, what we're talking about with a cluster, essentially you actually get more open space, and then you get more people on a smaller footprint. Correct me if I'm wrong, but that also would be something that would benefit us from the water standpoint, because these developments are on city water. So from a per capita, you're putting more people on a smaller footprint.
They're not in the MUSA.
MUSA is sewer. So, but on the flip side, are all of our OPs on city water or are some? I think they're all on city water, correct?
Oh, yeah, we hooked them up.
Because
Tapestry, Sanctuary, they're all in city water.
but I mean, when I'm conceiving that, that's correct, because they would be having smaller yards and more people on a smaller footprint. So essentially, it's a higher density area in a smaller footprint. That's a lower per capita usage of water, generally speaking, correct? Because we're
Right,
not
I mean,
talking about
you're-
irrigation in the 80% of the open area.
And if you look at other type of cluster developments, you could also reduce setbacks and these sorts of things, if you wanted to reduce lawns.
You're probably reducing your infrastructure imprint overall, right? So maintenance, long-term maintenance on your road, curb and gutter, utilities, things of that nature.
And that's the model, that's why I brought up Serenbe, because it's a highly successful model, and there's mixed use, so there's coffee shop, bake shop. The guy that created it as a certain type of design function where people are living closer. They have, a third space, right? They can go to the coffee shop and these little stores. There's trails, there's a organic farm, so it's like an agri-hood. So it's meant to be a little community in and of itself, but it's definitely an environmental approach, just like Jackson Meadow and just like our open space PUD. It's just a different form to have smaller lots and more density clustered. So I just wanted to bring it up. It would change, it wouldn't have that rural, each lot wouldn't have that rural feel if you were to approve a cluster development, but I think it falls in line with an open space. It is an open space plan unit development.
Well, honestly, I mean, we're not to the end of the slides, but I appreciate the thinking outside the box and looking at examples like that. That's what we asked for. We asked to think about, are there any changes that are worth making on behalf of the city? And our comp plan does discuss having options for different types of housing stocks. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. And we also add at the bottom, reducing the frontage if you have rear-loaded parking. That's something that creates, I think, a more traditional walkable community. I think it's better designed typically, because a lot of these homes have 3-car garages. You either want to hide it with the side, but this rear-loaded would be an incentive to have rear-loaded parking also. And that's something that you see in the Serenbe development. So let me just try to explain this as best possible. So total acres of the cluster, they have 78.24 acres. Their buildable area, which is what their density is based on, is 70 acres. Their open space is 49, and that's at 63%. If you want to add a cluster, would it be 60? Would it be 70? But it would meet a 60%. It wouldn't meet a 70%. At the 0.45, they would have 31.5 units. They're proposing 0.91, which is 64 units. And if you made a change to 0.8, which right now a half-acre lot built to a max density exceeds the 0.8, it would be 56 units. The one thing, I don't really want to get in the weeds with this, but they're one of the few developments that have a different future land use than the rest of the open space PUD, and the comp plan states that should be between 1 and 2 acres. I would just address it at the time of the application if you wanted to increase and match the density in the comp plan. through the plan unit development. The traditional, it's 109.04 acres. It's a really nice property, but there are a lot of wetlands on the property, which reduce the buildable area. So he's actually being penalized for having the wetlands in terms of the density. The open space is 58%. It is required to have 50. At the current density, 0.45 is 38.8. He's proposing 0.58, 50 units. If it went up to 0.8, he would potentially build 69 units. These are really large lots too. Some of them are over an acre. So I want to go back to kind of the key points or anything that you want to talk about. I think my biggest takeaway of just reviewing the code and going through it, spending the time, is that this slide, the density could be increased. Also, if you think about what, if lot sizes are decreased, open space increases. So I think this chart, it just shows based on the math of it, because we talked about that too, like what does the actual math say? So you could fit more units and still, I believe, create and keep and retain the open space. So it's just a question of.
So with the, I mean, just the general vibe I'm getting from this chart is that as you decrease the lot size, increase the density, you're also increasing the open space requirement?
So in theory, if you had a cluster development with 80 by 160 lots and you required 70% open space, if you're in the calculations, it's 0.86 units per acre.
Okay,
So that doesn't mean that that's the recommendation. You know, right now it's 0.45, it's just the actual numbers with a 60-foot
you
right.
know, the only thing I was thinking about that, I've always, I mean, personally liked garages from the rear of the house, that the whole alley aspect, but then I remember living in St. Paul and how hard it was for during the, and something Serenbe doesn't have is the winter
Yes.
snow. So the snow removal during that time and going through that is, so I'd be curious to talk to somebody in Wildflower to see how that works out for them in the winter months, when, not this winter, cause we really didn't get that much snow, but maybe last winter to see how that worked out.
So, yeah, we were talking about that too, maybe a couple months ago, snow removal. I know the alleys in St. Paul and Minneapolis are really narrow. So
Yeah.
Wildflower, I believe, is 33 feet with a 16-foot drive, and then there's open space.
Yeah.
Serenbe's open, they don't have the winters, but Serenbe has actually open space on the other side of the alley. It's basically forested, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and then
All right.
maybe 100, 200 feet from there.
So there's not a build on the other side necessarily.
Exactly, and the roads kind of loop around.
All right. Councilmember Beckstrom.
So your slide forward a couple. So when I made my comments earlier about the developers, you said this wasn't about the two developers, but interestingly in your chart, you're comparing the two developers and what they proposed and how it would change. And so,
Well, 100%.
again, is this, are we being asked to change things to get these two developments in there?
No, definitely not. It was, the reason I brought it up is because it was asked to listen to the developers that are currently building. And I thought it'd be good just to show the council, based on what they are proposing, you have the numbers in front of you on the current code. And whether you want to make these changes or not. If you don't want to add cluster to the OPPD, this idea kind of a cluster, then it would just either stay the same or maybe you want to make some changes to the traditional. This wouldn't necessarily qualify, so you would have to listen to the application and hear it, and then you can grant flexibility through that process for that individual or not.
It's just a little confusing,
Well,
is all, and I probably would have left that out if we weren't, if it wasn't about those two developers, but I hear what you're saying, and it is helpful to have some comparison as to what that looks like. The one thing with this that, with lot sizes, I mean, we don't, in the city, I don't think we have many areas where we can have larger lots, and so if we cluster, we're losing the opportunity to provide those larger lots to potential residents. I think of the Tapestry and that to me is the ideal, open space development, and that's Lake Elmo. And so, my fear in creating smaller lots and more compact development in this is that you lose that Lake Elmo. And I still feel like we should have an opportunity somewhere in our city for those types of developments to be able to come in, and if there's interest.
So would it, are you, so I think I hear what you're saying, Councilmember Beckstrom. Would the cluster be in addition, as like an option for the developer? So it wouldn't necessarily take away that opportunity to build a larger lot, or even, I don't know if this, it looked like the Serenbe had some cluster area, and they also had some larger lots maybe on the outside?
They do have larger lots on the outside.
Yeah, so gives the developer the opportunity to create some of that, I don't know, well, the cluster creates some opportunity for decreased infrastructure and things of that nature. But they certainly could go with the traditional time and have the larger lots in total, right?
Right, and the way I was thinking about it too is that if you have 10% that are cluster lots, smaller lots, the whole development would be labeled a cluster development and have to meet higher open space standards and
Right.
maybe any other standards. But it wouldn't prevent them from having even like acre lots or half acre lots or something like that.
Sure.
I just want to limit the cluster. Because I can see what could happen is you make the changes, you allow the smaller lots, then that's going to attract the developers to make more money. And you're not going to get those developers where it might cost a little bit more to develop, but you could have bigger lots. And so, I mean, is there a way to stay with the traditional and provide the cluster option as like a CUP or somewhere where it's only by approval? So then we don't have all of our OP lots in this cluster model, so we can prevent all of them from going that direction?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you wanted to designate a certain area of the city, potentially, I mean, that's the first option I'm thinking about, like, in terms of trying to do that. It's difficult to just say it's a conditional use, because you already have the open space plan, I mean, it's the same kind of process, right? You're going through, asking questions of the developer. So I understand, I mean, that's why we're bringing it. I think it was just something good to share with the cluster development, because the type of design, it's a little bit different, I understand that. I mean, I'm not gonna say it's not a different product, it's definitely a different product. But I also look at it as very limited housing stock, around 500,000, that I think if Lake Elmo could provide an open space development feel and that look where you have the trails, maybe the rear loaded parking, better design standards, typically what you see with open space, you may be able to get more of these developments and more people to move to Lake Elmo that are spending $500,000-600,000 that just don't have the $1 million to buy a house. So it's also providing that flexibility of, this may be a way to add a different product, right? Like it fits into the open space development, but it's a product that more people can afford.
Don't we have that though? Isn't that our developments that we're already building, like the Shokin Farm? And, I mean, those are the $500, $600, $700 homes.
But I think if someone wants to live in a rural open space setting with the trails, you have a buyer that's gonna move into one of these cluster open spaces that would not wanna move into maybe a typical
Traditional
plan unit
development.
development. I mean, that's what Serenbe was. It was a
Yeah.
success because if you've been to Atlanta, it's sprawled out, and it was basically like, we wanna stop this, and we wanna live in this type of community, so.
Councilmember Holtz?
I appreciate that, because I mean, if I do the math, if you're a married couple, one's a cop, one's a teacher, they currently can't afford our open space PUD things, whereas in this type of cluster, it gives that option. And those are absolutely residents that we would want to have to move here. So that's fair, that is completely fair, so I appreciate the thinking outside the box. So with this discussion, should there be a percentage of cluster, a percentage not? I don't have a view per se on that because it's still an open space. We're still potentially increasing the amount of open space and land that's preserved. My take would be if there could be a development that has both, or we, even if we do nothing and we don't do cluster at all, I do think it would be worth our interest when we're talking about the large lots in the PUDs, PUD, if they're on city water, that we maybe modify it to say only a certain % of the lot can be developed and irrigated.
I think that's similar to what Tapestry has, is it not?
Say it again?
It's so like if you go drive around Tapestry, it's like, I don't know what the buffer is, first 30 feet is that prairie grass that's
Okay.
not manicured, right? And then they're allowed a certain percentage of the lot as grass
Okay.
turf
Yep.
that gets watered and,
Is it, if we're working in good faith to try to reduce our per person, our per capita, that's a tool in the toolkit. Doing the cluster is also a very good tool in the toolkit. So I fully support the cluster and adding it as an option. It's helping the environment, it's less long-term maintenance for us on infrastructure, and it's reducing per capita. But if we're having that conversation of what if it's both, then I do think as we move forward with the large lots for future development, it is in our interest to take what is there in one development already and maybe make it a requirement. Because we can't have as a default that new developments with an acre and a half, you can just have a family of 4 that's irrigating an acre and a half. I wish we could, but thanks to a single judge, we can't.
Councilmember Dragisich.
My thought is, and I think there's a middle ground here that would make everybody happy, or hopefully, is allowing these cluster development, but picking the location strategically so they fit into the overall community, and say, well, there's areas, and maybe, and I'm just saying this, please don't misinterpret, this is just a wild sense. Maybe there's areas like closer to 94, where the cluster developments would fit in and logically work, and so we provide housing, more affordable housing, higher densities, combined with the open space to make them attractive for people to go, and yet keeping those bigger lots and other areas closer to the way, where they are in the city now. So I think we can get a win-win for everybody if we just think a little strategically and plan that out.
Fair.
An idea?
I just want to add that while I understand, I think that might be a really good compromise. There's a lot of talk about affordable housing and such. I don't think we want to dissuade people who can afford $1 million home from coming to Lake Elmo and buying big lots. I mean, I don't think our goal is to attract a significant number of new residents at a lower, cost, unless it makes sense. But I mean, I don't think that's our goal. And we talk a lot about affordable housing, which is, I don't think we want to turn anyone away if they're coming in with a good development.
Any other questions?
I don't have any more.
Jason, do you feel you have enough guidance from the council to come back with a proposal or come back with something that they can,
I do. I think my next step is gonna look at the areas for cluster development and just come up and submit that. And we can discuss that more in terms of, do we wanna bring it back to a workshop or, I don't know.
what is council's wishes? You wanna bring this back, see what he can come up with, that he feels he's gonna coalesce of what your thoughts are, or bring something back to vote on, or do you wanna run the workshop?
For me, it's definitely worth another workshop before it comes to any sort of council meeting.
I agree.
So one thing I added to the packet was draft language. That just helps me as I work through code to understand some of the parts that are just very confusing, because if you've done this for a while, you realize that's a big part of this. I'll clean that up and get something that's ready to go to planning commission for the next workshop, and then areas and maps, and we can go from there. And that way you'll actually be reading the proposed language.
That'd be great.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right, thank you.
Thanks for the work.
Jason. Next item is community room policy decision.
Mayor, Council, as you're well aware, we currently let HOAs use the old City Hall for their meetings. HOAs have to meet periodically, it's not the best of space, the IT's not good, they don't have the internet, they don't have TV. A few of them have asked Ms. Johnson to see if they could rent the community center. So we're coming before you to see if you guys would be interested in us having staff develop a policy. Couple things to consider. One of the things is these doors could not be locked or shut because this is your storm shelter. Your 250-mile-an-hour storm shelter with the door that rolls down. So this would have to be accessible to people if they were in here. The community room, we would be able to issue cards. People could check out. It'd be available for a day. We could drop it in the box when we're done. My gut guess is this would all be after hours, so there wouldn't be anybody here. But we'd have to talk about, do we want to do deposits? Do we want to charge a rent? And more importantly, I think for me to come back to a policy with you is, who do we like to rent it to? Right now, in Baytown Township, my place of residence, we have 4-H groups, Boy Scouts, we have craft book clubs, we have cards, in addition to HOAs. In addition to Valley Branch Watershed and other government units rent the Baytown Township City Hall. And so one of the things that we'd want to do before we come back with a policy is, what would you be interested in developing? You know, do you want Boy Scouts? Do you want a family reunion? Do you want Clark Schroeder to come in and rent it for my Super Bowl party with all my friends?
No.
Okay, that's one, we got that down. So,
I think.
open for discussion.
So read off again some of the organizations that have asked about it. We've had HOAs, right? I mean,
Yeah.
who currently uses the old,
Just the HOAs?
just the HOAs?
No? Who else?
Any group that wants to reserve it. We've had, especially recently, some neighborhood groups reserve use of the room. I mean, it kind of seems like folks don't get together at their house anymore with
Yeah.
people they don't know well. We've had knitting group in there. We've had, recently, one of our former election judges has been having a prayer group there a couple of times a month. They kind of rotate around different locations. But the biggest use is HOA meetings. Are there groups that we
And I
wouldn't
think
want?
if we open up this room here, which is, no offense, a much nicer room, I think we're gonna have to have a very definitive answer of who can rent it, otherwise it would be used more.
I think it'd be easier to say who we wouldn't want, what types of, I mean, you could go on and on with the types of groups, but are there specific types of events or groups that would not be appropriate for us to, I mean, is my understanding all along, it was meant to be a community room for the community, and so, but I also recognize there's groups that probably would not be appropriate, such as your Super Bowl parties and, things like that, but, I mean, would it be easier just to identify, like,
So one of the things you could look at, you could say it's available for nonprofits, not a for-profit company. I can't come in and sell Amway or Tupperware or whatever people sell these days, you know, that'd be a for-profit. You can't do other types of commercial activities in here. It'd be one way to simplify it would be, non-commercial, nonprofit organizations. HOAs are nonprofit, Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, 4-H, knitting clubs, hard to say because they're not actually, they probably don't register as a 501c3.
Right.
But,
why do we care about commercial or not?
well, I don't know, man, I'm just giving you an option. I mean, do we wanna have real estate companies coming in and offering investment strategies? The Lake Elmo Inn, I mean, John uses his space for every week I get 2 or 3, ads for them. Come down and have a free dinner on us,
Yeah,
and it's
right.
whatever they're selling, life insurance or whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, so part of it, you wanna think about also what we have for staff, so this is not a free venture for you also. So
Right.
will it be cleaning? Are we gonna have a deposit?
Well, I
Who's gonna
think-
clean up after them? The more it's used, the more wear and tear it's gonna have, and the more work's gonna be on somebody here in City Hall.
yeah.
I'm looking at you, Johnson.
I think my concern is kind of the safety and security part. Nobody's here, and you can't keep them out of here. You can't stop from walking upstairs and wandering around the building.
Well, those are key card access beyond the open space.
Yeah, beyond the
Right.
open space, right? But
The open space.
Again, I
So that-
would
that-
remind,
yeah,
this is a
understand.
community
There's
room.
an open area, and then you need a key
But
card.
this is a community room for the community. They paid for this building, they paid for that room. And so I want to be careful about, keeping people out. I mean, I think we should have parameters around deposit and expectations around cleaning and things like that. But I go back to it being a community room for the community, so I don't know.
And if people don't wanna pay a deposit or pay a rental fee, they can just go across the street.
Right.
I mean, you don't currently charge anything for that, right?
No.
And they come and get the key from you or Rebecca?
Correct.
And then they turn it back in, do you charge for that, or how do you keep track of the key?
We have a checkout form, and the keys are numbered,
Okay.
and so we get their information, they get the key, and then they drop it in our overnight drop box when they're done.
Yeah.
It's
What
worked
happens if-
very well.
what happens if there's a problem, water leak, or, I don't know, whatever happens, is there an emergency number they call? Is it Marty?
We have the
So
police, right?
if it was an emergency, something with heat or plumbing or something, they can always get a hold of 911 or dispatch. Fire department's right here, and then we have an on-call staff that can come in and.
We have
Yeah,
fire,
and
and
the
we have the
fire
sheriff, just
Do
on the
we,
other end of the building.
do we
too.
say that, like, the community room can be used if it's not being used by an organization to have a meeting during the day, and then keep the former city hall for after-hours meetings?
That's another option, but, you're gonna limit the 4-H and the Cub
Yeah,
Scouts
right.
and people who are.
From here,
Yeah, from.
but there'd
from-
still be a space.
They can still go over there. I mean,
Why wouldn't we want them here?
No, I'm just saying, if you wanna look at it that way.
yeah,
With
and the fire
If
chief.
you're worried about security
Yeah.
in
With the-
this building.
With the key card, can those be programmed so it expires after 24 hours? In case someone doesn't return it?
She
Oh,
says yes.
the answer's yes.
The cable caster says yes.
Because I think that would definitely be something worthwhile, because if I were to rent it, 50-50 chance I don't return it, not on purpose, I just forget.
Right.
That's
Sure.
entirely fair.
That's a good point.
Yeah, and, from a security standpoint, the fire chief has, made it clear that, he is not to be, and his staff are not to be relied on to close, supervise, look and see what's happening, because their job is elsewhere,
Right,
but people can't get into that area, so you have to have a key to get through there. This key will only be accessible for the front door, and won't be any interior doors. So, I guess we just have to decide if we wanna have anybody do it. I guess you have to anticipate that, I don't know. It's a nice space.
is that community room as big as the room that's available at the old city hall? Feels like it's a little bit smaller. I mean, it has some more amenities, right? But
I think they're very comparable.
are they?
We got nice tables, we got nice chairs, we got the TVs, we can hook up our computers to it, we can do the presentations.
Maybe I'm too much of a trusting soul, but I mean, this is, the community's paying for this. We call it the city center, right? I think it should be allowed for them to use, whether it's HOA or Boy Scouts or 4-H. As long as they check it out, and
Wine tasting,
so then,
And have
I don't know,
alcohol.
Yeah, you're bringing, I mean, could we canvass some other city halls and that they rent it out, see if they do rent it out? What, I mean, we've done that with some of our other planning stuff before, is just say, what do you guys do? Do you have a policy in place on how you do that? I mean, maybe that would be good to look at, but, I don't think it's a bad idea to say, you're gonna put down a $50 deposit and, you know, keep it clean, or if we have to clean it, then we're gonna use the deposit to make it clean. I think that's fair as well.
What protection you have in place for damage, if someone damages something? Say you have a homeowner association, there's, coming in the morning and there's something damaged,
They take the TV off the wall.
yeah, they take the TV off the wall, and what what's our recourse on that? You can't get, blood from a turnip, so they may not have any money, but
They've got money.
does our insurance cover that?
We haven't had an issue yet.
Well, I guess that's where I'm trusting. I'm like, these are organizations that are gonna wanna use it again. I don't think they do anything untoward.
Yeah.
I mean, that was gonna be my question is there a form that is signed in addition to the security deposit saying, I acknowledge that not only will I lose my security deposit, but if there's damage above and beyond the security deposit? Because again, it's not about intent. I'm
Some
not
Boy
gonna,
Scout decides to throw a crayon and takes out a TV.
my son, yes. So as the Boy Scouts, that, they could easily spill a bunch of pop, not wine. Pop also stains the carpet. It's gonna be way more than $50 to clean. So I'd be curious what other cities do as well. And I assume we're not even talking about indemnification in terms of, if someone falls, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, I'd be curious what they do for a waiver in addition to security deposit.
Okay.
I mean, in doing birthday parties for kids at various locations, like, there are processes that exist. Woodbury, for their city park, you can rent out facilities for their kids, and obviously that's a whole other story because of physical dangers, but processes exist. So yeah, I'd be curious what Cottage Grove does with theirs as well, because they definitely rent theirs out to other users, such as to MPCA and DNR.
Yeah, if the watershed wanted to have a meeting here, or, over the winter, we had, Met Council in here. That was kind of a different ball of wax, but, other entities could do that.
I think I have enough information. I'll come up with a proposed policy. I'll bring some sample policies from other cities in your packet that you'll be able to read. And then you guys can it shouldn't be that complicated to add or subtract. But I think the general consensus is let's just open it up to the community without really any restrictions. And we can adjust it later if we end up with
Yeah.
problems that maybe are unintended.
Then it'd be Nicole's problem.
What?
Then it'll be Nicole's problem.
Yes. You'll have to deal with that.
She'll have to stay here until they leave.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you. Items for future work session agenda is the Parks Master Plan. Is that gonna be like a finalized master plan, or, is it pretty much completed, do we know? Yeah, Marty?
Answer that, yeah, so, right now, it's been assembled, it's went through the work groups. It'll be presented at the Park Commission meeting next Monday.
Next Monday.
And if they approve to present it to you,
Okay.
that will be final in its eyes.
All right, thank you. And then Lake Association grants, which we should all be familiar with the exception of maybe Councilmember Dragisich. With that, yeah,
I have a question.
what's your question?
Yes.
I was just about to beat this gavel so we could go outside while the sun's still there.
Yeah, it's a short question.
Oh.
Clarissa wants to know if you're all going to be here on August 27th to go through the initial budget planning meeting. And you don't have to answer me now, but she would appreciate an answer, so we make sure we have a full contingent of council members on August 27th. So
August 27th.
I know, it's hard to say.
You can always call in.
All right, thank you. We're a little ahead of schedule, actually. You guys want to just sit around and chat for a while? No? All right. We'll adjourn this meeting at 8:24.
And that gavel works.